Michael, Michael, I regret ever processing your visa to come over.
She sponsored her husband's visa, then found out she was just his Maga. She didn't mean to come home early that day, but destiny has a way of revealing what darkness tries to hide. Sarah walked into her quiet Houston home, just in time to hear her husband call her a word no wife should ever hear. Not a pet name, not a mistake. Maga. A fool. A stepping stone. A ladder to America. She froze at the doorway, listening as the man she loved spoke to another woman, his real love, his real family, promising them a future built on her sacrifice, her double shifts, her aching feet, her $15,000 hope. All of it just a ticket for him, nothing more. He wasn't supposed to know she was standing there. He wasn't supposed to forget that walls have ears. For months she believed she had married a grateful, humble man, but in a single moment, she realized she had married a plan. Now she's not just a wife. She's a woman with a choice. Let him secure the life he schemed for, or take back the one he tried to steal from her. Either way, someone's American dream is about to be destroyed forever. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ocean of Tales. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe on this channel. We will be grateful if you help us make YouTube to recognize this channel. We will be notifying you when we drop a new video. Don't forget to tell us where you are watching from. Fluorescent lights buzzed above Sarah's head as she peeled off her gloves at the end of a brutal shift, fingers aching from endless IVs and charting. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and tired bodies, but all she could think about was her bed and the quiet of her Houston home. Her feet throbbed inside worn sneakers, each step toward the exit feeling heavier than the last. She wasn't supposed to leave this early, but the migraine pressing behind her eyes won the argument, and she had no idea what that small decision was about to expose. Traffic crawled along the freeway, red brake lights stretching like a vein of fire through the city as she drove in silence. The radio stayed off. She was too tired to pretend she cared about songs or news. Her mind drifted to her husband, picturing him waiting at home, maybe cooking, maybe scrolling his phone on the couch. For a moment, the thoughts soothed her, like a soft blanket over a rough day. But somewhere beneath that comfort, a quiet unease stirred, thin and vague, like a shadow she couldn't name yet. Rain-speckled clouds hung low as she pulled into the driveway, the Houston air warm and sticky against her skin when she stepped out. Her key slid into the front door, but she noticed the knob turned too easily, like it was already unlocked. Sarah frowned and paused, her nurse instincts noting the detail even as her tired brain tried to dismiss it. The house should have felt welcoming, but tonight the silence inside sat too still, too perfect, like a held breath waiting for something to break. Soft footsteps carried her down the hallway, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the lemon cleaner she used on weekends. The living room was empty, the TV dark, a glass on the table with a ring of water drying at the base. She dropped her bag, quietly listening. Then she heard it, a low murmur from the bedroom, his voice rolling in that relaxed tone he never used with her anymore. It wasn't the sound of a man talking to his wife. It was softer, freer, like he had finally taken off a mask. She moved closer, bare feet gliding over the polished floor, heart thudding in her chest with each small step. The bedroom door was almost closed, just enough space for sound to slip through the crack. On the other side, his voice sharpened into pidgin, fast and confident, words tumbling out with a swagger she hadn't heard since back home. Her mind tried to translate in real time, but one word cut clearer than the rest, slicing through the fog in her head like glass. He called someone Maga, and suddenly the world inside that hallway tilted. Her body went cold before her brain fully caught up, every muscle locking as she listened harder, barely breathing. He wasn't joking. His tone held no playfulness, only strategy, only calculation, as he described plans and timelines that didn't include her heart, only her passport and her paycheck. Sarah stood there, realizing she wasn't the prize, she was the platform. The love she thought she'd built her life on began to crumble grain by grain, and the quiet house turned into a witness to a crime with no broken windows, only a broken illusion. She eased back from the door, pulse roaring in her ears like distant thunder, fighting the urge to burst in and demand answers. Instead, something colder settled over her chest, a strange calm that came when pain moved past tears and into clarity. She stared at the hallway wall as if it could tell her what to do next, as if it had seen this coming long before she did. In that moment, she knew her life had just split into a before and after, and the version of her who walked in would not be the one who walked out. The morning after the discovery, Sarah woke before dawn, her body moving on autopilot as she slipped into scrubs still warm from the dryer. The sky outside was a dull gray, and the Houston air hung heavy with humidity as she drove to the hospital. The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing the sterile smell she'd grown so used to. Her hands trembled slightly as she clocked in, but she buried the sensation under the weight of routine. If she focused on work, maybe the echo of that word, Maga, would loosen its grip on her chest, even briefly. She pushed through 12 unforgiving hours, shuffling from room to room, lifting patients twice her size, cleaning spills, calming panicked families, and swallowing exhaustion until her throat burned. Each ache in her back reminded her of the nights she worked overtime to pay immigration fees. Each blister on her heel felt like a tiny sacrifice she made, believing it was for a shared future. Yet today, every sacrifice replayed in her mind like a debt she could never reclaim. Still, she kept moving, hoping movement would silence the growing suspicion that she had been financing her own heartbreak. Her coworkers laughed in the break room over microwaved meals, their voices mingling in a soft buzz she couldn't join. She sat alone, staring into her cup of stale coffee as memories of Michael surfaced. The early morning calls he used to make, the way he'd ask about her shift, the warmth in his tone that once made nurses tease her for blushing. Now those memories gnawed at her, feeling staged, orchestrated, rehearsed. She wondered how many of his smiles were real and how many were rehearsals for a performance designed to last just long enough. When she moved to the supply room to restock gloves, her legs buckled for a moment, forcing her to grip the metal shelf to steady herself. All around her, boxes towered like silent judges, each one a reminder of the life she built through hard work, alone, mostly, even after marriage. In that dim, narrow space, she remembered the nights she stayed past midnight because they needed the extra hands, telling herself she was building a foundation for something beautiful. Now she questioned whether she had been building only scaffolding, temporary, disposable, meant to be taken down after use. Driving home later, her hands clenched the steering wheel as evening traffic pulsed like a living organism around her. She passed the same gas station where she once waited excitedly for Michael's flight to land, remembering how nervous she'd been about seeing him again after months apart. She had rehearsed her smile in the car mirror that day. Now she wondered what expression he'd rehearsed for her. The weight of the day pressed deeper into her chest, and as she approached her exit, she realized she had no idea how to walk into that house anymore. Inside the house, she drifted through each room quietly, touching surfaces absent-mindedly, the counter where she packed his lunches, the couch where he massaged her feet, the empty dinner table she had once imagined children gathered around. Every corner held echoes of effort she poured into their life. Yet the silence tonight felt accusatory, reminding her she had ignored subtle signs. The calls he took outside, the sudden gym obsession, the vanishing tenderness. She told herself love required patience, but now she saw it had required blindness too. And the cost of that blindness was becoming clearer with every step. Standing in the doorway of their bedroom, she felt the weight of her exhaustion pull her shoulders down. But beneath the fatigue lay something sharper, anger wrapped in heartbreak, steady and rising. For years, she believed her sacrifices would lead to stability, to partnership, to a home filled with love. Instead, they had positioned her perfectly for betrayal. She'd bled enough. The memory of Michael's arrival returned to her that night with startling clarity, as if her mind wanted to re-examine every frame she once cherished. She saw herself in the airport terminal, clutching a welcome sign with trembling hands, heart pounding with excitement. When he walked through the sliding doors, he carried the air of a man humbled by opportunity, smiling with a gentleness that made strangers glance approvingly. His arms wrapped around her like he'd been waiting his whole life. She mistook that warmth for sincerity, never imagining how skillfully a rehearsed embrace could imitate love. The early days with him felt like scenes from a rom-com she didn't deserve, but gratefully accepted. He cooked elaborate dinners, plating meals with care. He cleaned the house while humming old love songs. He told her he couldn't believe God brought him such a blessing. Each gesture filled places in her heart she thought would stay empty forever. She didn't realize then that affection can be weaponized, that kindness can be a strategy, and that some men build trust the way con artists build confidence, slowly, consistently, and just convincingly enough to feel real. In those first months, Michael made sure her friends adore him. He laughed at their jokes, helped with groceries, complimented their children, and even prayed during dinners with a fire that made him seem deeply spiritual. Her co-workers called him a good man, and for a while, she believed them. But now, replaying each interaction, she wondered whether he loved the attention more than he loved her. She questioned if he had been studying her social circle like a map, identifying which people he needed to impress to strengthen his cover story. He carried himself with calculated humility, often reminding her how grateful he was, how hard life had been before her, how she had rescued him from hopelessness. He talked about dreams they would build together, describing a future where they would own a home, raise children, and travel the world. Those dreams stitched themselves into her heart, giving her purpose during long night shifts. But looking back, she noticed the pattern. His dreams always centered on him rising, him achieving, him accessing something. She realized her part in those dreams was simply to provide the bridge. It wasn't just romance he perfected. He mastered vulnerability too. He spoke of childhood struggles, betrayals he'd suffered, opportunities stolen from him. She had cried with him on nights he opened up, believing she was his safe place. But now, standing in the kitchen where he once wept into her shoulder, she questioned the authenticity of those stories. Had he memorized them? Had other women heard the same tearful confessions? She replayed the way he watched her reaction each time he shared a burden, as if assessing whether she'd fallen deeper into the emotional net he cast. Even the small details, like how he always picked up his phone on the third ring, or how he stepped onto the balcony for private work calls, felt different now. She once admired how organized he was, how disciplined. Now she saw it as choreography. She remembered a night when he claimed he was speaking to an uncle overseas, yet his voice dropped to a tone softer than he ever used with family. She dismissed the unease then, telling herself she was insecure. But the truth was simpler. Her instincts had whispered, and she had silenced them. As she lay in bed replaying every moment, the mask he wore became clearer. Not cracked, but revealed. He hadn't deceived her through grand lies. He had deceived her through consistency. He became exactly who she longed for, performing love like a well-scripted role, waiting for his visa, his paperwork, his freedom. The realization tightened her chest, yet something else stirred beneath the pain, a rising clarity that she had not married a man, but a mission disguised as devotion. And once a mask is recognized, it can never be unseen. The question now was what she would do with that truth. The shift in their marriage didn't come loudly. It crept in like a change in weather, subtle, almost unnoticeable, until everything felt colder. Sarah began waking up to small absences, a missing hug, a distant tone, a rushed morning routine. Michael started leaving the house earlier than usual, claiming he needed to adjust to American work culture. She believed him at first, telling herself every couple experiences phases. But beneath that logic, a quiet discomfort settled. Like a pebble in her shoe, she kept trying to ignore, hoping it would somehow disappear on its own. Little things, once sweet, began feeling transactional. He cooked only when she reminded him. He cleaned only if she seemed frustrated. He massaged her feet only when he needed her to review immigration paperwork. Each gesture carried a new weight, a subtle price tag she couldn't yet name. She brushed off her unease by blaming fatigue, culture shock, or stress. Yet every time she signed a document or paid a fee, she noticed how quickly he brightened, as if affection were tied directly to progress on his immigration timeline, not to her. Phone calls became his new escape. He stepped onto the balcony with a smile she hadn't seen directed at her in weeks. Some nights, he returned indoors humming, energized, almost glowing. When she asked simple questions, "Who was that?" or "Everything okay?" his answers came too clean, too ready, like lines rehearsed backstage. She felt the sting of being excluded from a part of his life that wasn't supposed to exist. Still, she convinced herself she was overthinking, not wanting to believe the man she sponsored was edging her out of the script of her own marriage. The intimacy they once shared faded slowly, replaced with polite gestures and surface-level affection. He no longer reached for her hand in public or kissed her forehead absent-mindedly the way he used to. Instead, he asked about deadlines, forms, interviews, and fees. Immigration became their new love language, cold, clinical, and lopsided. She noticed he grew tense whenever she mentioned long-term plans that didn't revolve around his visa. The imbalance widened with each passing week, turning their home into a place where affection was rationed like currency, exchanged only when it benefited him. The first real confrontation came silently. One evening, she walked into the living room to find him scrolling through job listings, exciting ones, out-of-state, high-paying positions that didn't include her in the plan. He quickly closed the tabs when he saw her, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She said nothing, but the silence between them thickened, carrying the weight of a truth she wasn't ready to speak. In that moment, she understood something deeply unsettling. Love shouldn't require constant justification, yet she felt she was always justifying her place in his future. Small inconsistencies began piling up, forming a quiet mountain of red flags. Receipts from places she didn't know he visited. Gym sessions that extended long past reasonable hours. A sudden obsession with his appearance, new cologne, tailored shirts, expensive haircuts. He claimed he wanted to look professional for America, but the transformation felt performative, aimed at an audience she couldn't see. Every instinct in her wanted to question him, yet something inside her feared the answer. Doubt wrapped around her ribs like a tightening belt, and she felt herself breaking into smaller pieces each day. One night, while sorting through laundry, she found a slip of paper tucked in the pocket of his jeans, an unfamiliar number scribbled quickly, with a heart drawn beside it. Her throat tightened as she stared at it, the room spinning slightly under the weight of possibility. She set the paper down slowly, her hands trembling not with fear, but with the dawning realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern she had refused to name. Love, she realized, had shifted from mutual devotion to calculated transaction. And transactions always end when the buyer stops paying. The moment replayed in her mind like a glitching film reel, looping so violently she felt nauseous. Sarah stood frozen in that narrow hallway, her pulse thundering as his voice leaked through the crack in the door. She recognized the cadence instantly, the confident pigeon, the familiar swagger he never used with her. It wasn't the sound of a husband speaking. It was the sound of a man dropping his mask because he believed the audience was finally gone. Every syllable landed like a blow, reshaping her understanding of every smile he had ever given her. She pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself, her breath shallow as she listened harder. Michael spoke with a laughter she had never heard, not warmth, but triumph. He spoke like someone celebrating a plan nearing completion. She strained to catch every word, each one peeling back layers she didn't know existed. Then it came, sharp, careless, and unmistakable. He called her Maga. Not a pet name, not a joke. A fool, a resource, a stepping stone. The sound of it detonated inside her chest, scattering pieces of trust she'd spent years carefully building. He continued speaking, unaware that the woman financing his American dream was standing inches away. He described timelines. When he'd get his green card, when he'd file for divorce, when he'd bring his real family to the States. His tone was so casual, so confident, as if every sacrifice she made were just a transaction on his roadmap. Sarah felt her legs weaken, yet she couldn't move. Hearing him plan his exit strategy while still sleeping in her bed cracked something irrevocable inside her, a fracture too deep for anger to reach just yet. A woman's voice chimed from the phone, soft but unmistakably intimate. She heard a child in the background calling him Daddy, the word echoing down the hallway like a ghost. The woman giggled and asked how long until he freed himself. Sarah's stomach knotted painfully, ball rising as she realized this wasn't some flirtation or a recent affair. This was a life he kept running parallel to hers. A hidden family, a secret loyalty, a love he protected fiercely while using her as scaffolding to build his own future. She felt her world tilt off balance entirely. He assured them that everything was going smoothly, praising Sarah for being easy to manipulate, laughing about how desperately she wanted love. The cruelty in his tone sliced deeper than any insult. It wasn't just betrayal, it was ridicule. He wasn't simply cheating, he was studying her, exploiting her loneliness, milking her effort like an investment he expected to mature. She covered her mouth to muffle a sob, but even then, the sound felt too loud, too alive in a moment where she wished she could disappear entirely into the walls. When he mentioned their upcoming immigration interview, excitement filled his voice. He spoke about getting his papers locked in, claiming she would never see it coming. The arrogance stunned her. She had envisioned that interview as a milestone for their marriage, proof that they were building a future together. Instead, he saw it as the finish line of his deception. An endpoint, a victory lap. She had poured her savings, energy, and heart into a dream he never intended to share. The realization stung like ice water poured over open wounds. Sarah stepped back from the door slowly, her breathing shaky but controlled. Something inside her shifted, something cold, steady, and frighteningly calm. The tears drying on her cheeks hardened into resolve. She understood now that love had not blinded her, hope had. And hope in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. She wiped her face, inhaled deeply, and felt a clarity she had never known. The word Maga hadn't just broken her heart. It had awakened her. And once a woman recognizes she's been cast as the fool, the entire script begins to change. The hours after overhearing the call felt unreal, as if Sarah were drifting through a fog she couldn't fully touch. But when she sat alone at the dining table later that night, the pieces began snapping together with uncomfortable precision. She remembered the unexplained transfers on their joint account, the sudden secrecy around his phone, the emotional distance disguised as fatigue. These weren't random changes. They were symptoms of a double life unfolding in the shadows. And now that she knew what to look for, the truth revealed itself with ruthless clarity she could no longer ignore. Her mind circled back to the woman's voice on the phone, soft, familiar, too intimate to be new. The way she called him Daddy, the laughter in her tone, the comfort in her questions. That wasn't the voice of a mistress. It was the voice of someone who held a claim, someone who believed she had rights over him. Sarah replayed the sound of the child calling in the background, the casual normalcy of it, and her chest constricted. This wasn't an affair. This was a family. A family she hadn't known she was intruding upon. She began remembering small moments. Photos he was quick to swipe away, days he insisted on running errands alone, the way his phone turned face down whenever they watched movies. She brushed it off then, thinking marriage required trust. Now those moments felt like breadcrumbs she had ignored, scattered along a trail he never expected her to follow. It became painfully obvious that he had built two worlds, one with her, fueled by paperwork and opportunity, and another with them, sustained by loyalty and affection. She had been the bridge, functional, necessary, but never meant to be permanent. His real wife's face flashed in her imagination. Unknown, unseen, yet suddenly present in every corner of the house. A woman somewhere who woke up to his good morning texts, who knew his favorite jokes, who understood his silences. Sarah imagined her packing school lunches, managing household routines, whispering plans about America the way couples whisper dreams on quiet nights. The realization stung bitterly. She had been giving him what he needed while another woman received what she wanted. It was a violent dissonance, a split loyalty sharpened by deceit, and it burned through her veins. Then came the part that chilled her. The secret family had been part of the plan all along. The affection, the humility, the sweet promises, none were spontaneous acts of love. They were tools, leveraged to secure a green card, a path, a future he intended to share only with them. She remembered him saying he wanted children someday, but now she saw the lie beneath it. He already had children. She wasn't the future. She was a temporary phase, the administrative stage of his life, an investment to be discarded once it had served its purpose. As she walked through the house, her fingers grazed surfaces he once touched, the kitchen counter he cooked on, the couch he napped on after workouts, the mirror he stood before adjusting ties she bought. Every object felt contaminated, carrying the weight of invisible fingerprints from strangers who unknowingly shared her husband. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was spatial. He had brought her into a home built on someone else's foundation, placed her in a marriage that belonged to someone else, and expected her to hold it together without ever learning she was the placeholder. By the time she reached the bedroom, her shock had calcified into something firmer. Resolve coated in indignation. She sat on the edge of the bed and allowed the truth to settle fully. She had not married a man in search of love. She had married a man in search of paperwork. And the person he promised a future to was not lying next to her at night. The weight of that revelation pressed into her shoulders like a final verdict. His double life was no longer hidden. And now that she could see it, she knew she would never unsee it. Sarah didn't remember the drive to the grocery store parking lot. Her body moved on instinct, guided by shock rather than direction. The moment she turned off the engine, the silence inside the car swallowed her whole. Streetlights flickered across her windshield, casting broken patterns over hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She gripped the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping her upright, her breath coming in uneven pulls. The reality of what she'd heard pressed against her chest, heavy and merciless, daring her to fully confront the life she'd unknowingly stepped into. Minutes blurred into each other as she stared at nothing, her mind replaying fragments of conversations, smiles, and promises that now felt poisoned. Her heart raced in chaotic rhythms, anger, humiliation, grief, disbelief, all crashing into each other like waves in a storm. She had worked so hard to build something stable, something meaningful, and now the foundation beneath her had shifted violently. Tears slid down her cheeks without request or permission, dripping onto her scrub top. She didn't wipe them. The pain felt too deep for quick fixes. It demanded to be felt in its full, crushing weight. She leaned back in the seat, letting the harsh glow of the parking lot lights expose the truth she had hidden even from herself. Every ignored red flag, every uneasy feeling she buried under love, every moment she doubted her instincts, all of it returned like a slow, punishing replay. She had been loaning love to a man who saw her as collateral. She whispered apologies to herself, quiet, broken confessions she didn't know she needed. Apologies for settling, for shrinking, for giving a man the benefit of doubt that he never earned and never intended to deserve. At some point, the tears stopped, replaced by a strange numbness that felt almost peaceful. The kind of peace born not from comfort, but from clarity. She replayed Michael's words, his laughter, his plans, his pride, and something shifted inside her. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was awakening. She realized she had spent years pouring into a man who saw her as a resource, not a partner. And that realization peeled away the last layer of denial she didn't know she was holding. Her spirit didn't break in that moment. It rearranged itself, forming sharper edges she had never allowed before. The numbness began melting into something else, something warmer, steadier, stronger. A quiet fire ignited in her chest, small at first, but growing with every breath she took. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't pettiness. It was dignity reclaiming space in her spirit. The same woman who had survived double shifts, loneliness, and sacrifice wasn't weak. She was exhausted. And exhaustion had made her vulnerable. But clarity made her powerful. As she sat there, the idea bloomed slowly. She didn't have to remain a pawn in someone else's game. She could rewrite the rules entirely. The longer she sat in the car, the more her fear dissolved, revealing a version of herself she had forgotten existed. A woman who once believed she deserved tenderness, respect, and loyalty. A woman who crossed oceans and built a life from scratch. A woman who had survived more than heartbreak before and would survive this too. She realized Michael hadn't broken her. He had broken the illusion she built around him. And illusions, once shattered, lose all their power. What remained was truth, and truth, she realized, was far more liberating than love built on lies. By the third hour, she straightened in her seat, wiped her face, and exhaled with purpose. A decision formed, clean, sharp, and final. She would not confront him with tears. She would not beg for explanations. She would not give him the performance he expected. Instead, she would act quietly, strategically, with the same precision he had used against her. If he viewed her as a stepping stone, she would become the stone that shifts, the one that cracks the entire path beneath him. The woman who entered that parking lot was broken. The one driving away was reborn. The morning sunlight spilled through the blinds as Sarah sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by immigration papers she once guarded like sacred documents. Her hands hovered over them, not trembling anymore, but steady with purpose. The same forms she filled with hope now felt like weapons she never knew she owned. She opened her laptop, the USCIS website glowing back at her, cold and procedural. As she clicked through the portal, a quiet strength unfurled inside her. She wasn't doing this out of rage. She was doing it out of liberation. A woman reclaiming what had been stolen from her. Each word she typed in the withdrawal statement felt like stitching a wound shut. She explained clearly, concisely, without emotional rambling, evidence of deception, suspected fraudulent intent, withdrawal of financial sponsorship. She attached screenshots of bank transfers, notes of inconsistencies, and a statement recounting what she overheard. The truth didn't need embellishment. It carried its own sharpness. As she read it over, she felt a strange calm settle in her bones. This was not retaliation. It was correction. She was exposing a structure built on lies and choosing to no longer support its weight. Then came the letter, the final piece. She drafted it with deliberate care, every sentence a mirror held up to Michael's actions. She wrote about the promises, the sacrifices, the hidden family, the cruel word he used so casually. She didn't write to wound him. She wrote to ensure the immigration officer understood the full story. When she printed the letter, her hands didn't shake. She folded it neatly, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it with a quiet exhale that felt like releasing the last breath of a dying illusion. The empire he built had just met its architect. Driving to the post office, she noticed the world looked different, sharper, more defined. The trees lining the street swayed confidently in the morning breeze, uninfluenced by human deception. She parked and stepped out, her feet moving with a certainty she hadn't felt in years. Inside, the clerk took her envelope without knowing its magnitude, placing it in a bin among hundreds of others. But Sarah knew. She felt power hum beneath her skin as the envelope disappeared from sight. That simple drop carried enough truth to dismantle a man's entire strategy. It felt both terrifying and freeing. Back in her car, she stared at the steering wheel, processing what she'd just done. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, she felt control return to her fingertips. No begging. No confrontation. No drama. She had taken the quiet path, the one built on action rather than emotion. Michael had plotted meticulously, believing she would remain passive, pliable, predictable. He miscalculated. She realized with sudden clarity that silence was her sharpest weapon. She didn't need to expose him publicly. She only needed to redirect the paperwork he tried to weaponize against her life. Later that afternoon, she checked her USCIS account again, watching as the status updated to reflect her withdrawal. A single sentence on the screen confirmed it. Sponsorship terminated by petitioner. That line echoed like a bell toll marking the end of something toxic. She leaned back in her chair, letting the magnitude wash over her. The man who had used her kindness as currency no longer had access to her resources. The bridge he walked across had collapsed behind him, not out of cruelty, but because she finally understood the value of protecting her own spirit. As evening settled, she sat by the window with a quiet, steady heartbeat. She imagined Michael preparing for the immigration interview, confident, rehearsed, completely unaware that the foundation beneath him had already crumbled. She felt no guilt, only clarity. Empires built on deceit never withstand truth. And Sarah had chosen truth. The letter she mailed that morning wasn't just paperwork. It was a declaration of self-worth. A turning point, a boundary drawn with finality. She closed her eyes briefly, knowing the storm ahead would shake him, but not her. She had already weathered the worst and come out standing. The morning of the interview arrived with an eerie calm, the kind that settles before a storm. Sarah dressed quietly, observing Michael as he adjusted his suit with the confidence of a man convinced his victory was already secured. He hummed while fixing his tie, rehearsing answers she knew he'd memorized months ago. She watched him through the mirror, smooth, poised, triumphant. Never suspecting the ground beneath him had already split open. Her heartbeat stayed steady. His fate was no longer tied to her pain. Today, truth would do the speaking he believed he could outrun. Inside the USCIS lobby, fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow over the waiting area, where couples whispered anxiously and shuffled paperwork. Michael sat beside her, straight-backed and smiling, tapping his foot in anticipation. He nudged her once, offering a wink as if they were partners in a shared journey. Sarah felt the irony settle on her skin like frost. The room smelled of disinfectant and nervous energy, but beneath it all, she sensed a tension building, subtle but unmistakable. She clasped her hands in her lap, waiting, not for the interview, but for the unraveling. When the door opened and an officer called his name, Michael jumped up quickly, smoothing his jacket. He extended a hand to help her stand, but Sarah stayed seated. Confusion flickered across his face, a tiny crack in his performance. Before he could speak, two uniformed ICE officers stepped forward from the hallway, silent, authoritative, deliberately precise. The air shifted instantly. The room grew still. Michael's smile faltered as they approached, their badges catching the fluorescent light. His posture shrank a fraction, as if his body recognized danger before his mind accepted it. The officers asked for his identification, their voices calm but final. Michael complied, confused but trying to maintain composure. He glanced at Sarah, searching her face for reassurance. She didn't offer. One officer scanned the documents and nodded to the other, and suddenly the tone changed. They informed him that his petition had been withdrawn by the sponsor. His visa had expired. He was no longer authorized to remain in the United States. Silence crashed into the room. Michael's eyes darted wildly towards Sarah, disbelief widening them. She felt the moment sharpen like a blade. His voice broke as he demanded clarification, insisting there must be a mistake. But the officers remained unmoved, reciting procedures with cold professionalism. As they turned him around to place restraints on his wrists, panic erupted in his features. Raw, unfiltered, completely unmasked. Gone was the charm. Gone the confidence. Gone the rehearsed humility. In its place stood a man witnessing the collapse of his own strategy. His knees weakened. His breath quickened. And still, he searched for Sarah's eyes, desperate for the woman he once controlled to save him from consequences he designed himself. Sarah stood slowly, smoothing her dress with deliberate care. She approached only far enough for him to hear her inhale, to feel her presence. His lips trembled around her name, but she didn't offer him the comfort he begged for with his eyes. Instead, she held his gaze with a steady calm that chilled him more than the handcuffs ever could. In that moment, he understood. She knew everything. She had known before they stepped into this building. She had walked in with quiet intention, allowing him to confront the ending he never believed she was capable of writing. As the officers escorted him toward a rear hallway, his voice cracked, calling after her with disbelief, anger, and a desperation he could no longer hide.
Sarah didn't follow.
She didn't flinch. She simply turned and walked out of the building, her heels clicking against the polished floor with a rhythm that felt like liberation. Outside, the sunlight greeted her, warm and steady, a stark contrast to the cold panic unfolding behind her. She inhaled deeply, knowing this was the moment their paths diverged for good. His American dream had ended in handcuffs. Hers had just begun with freedom. News of Michael's detention traveled faster than she expected, moving through whispered conversations and group chats like wind through dry grass. Sarah didn't make any announcements, but communities have a way of stitching stories together without permission. By the next morning, her phone glowed with missed calls from numbers she recognized and many she didn't. The silence in her house contrasted sharply with the noise outside it: speculation, pity, accusations. She scrolled through messages with numb fingers, realizing people she barely spoke to had suddenly become experts on her life, her marriage, and her morality. Church members, once warm and welcoming, began sending cryptic voice notes swollen with judgment. They reminded her of forgiveness, of grace, of the duty of a wife to cover her husband's flaws. Their words dripped with the kind of spirituality that excuses male deceit and burdens women with eternal patience. Some insisted she had broken covenant, others hinted she was too independent, a phrase soaked in discomfort. The hypocrisy tightened around her like a rope. No one asked how much she had endured. No one asked what she heard through that bedroom door. They only cared about appearances. Michael's family reacted with violent indignation, flooding her inbox with insults wrapped in Bible verses. They painted him as the victim, a man wrongfully punished by a wicked American wife. His real wife sent desperate messages claiming she acted for the sake of their children, pleading for mercy with emotional weight meant to break her resolve. Sarah read each message carefully, noting how none of them denied his deception. Their defense was not innocence, it was entitlement. They believed she owed him stability simply because he desired it, even if he had built that desire on her suffering. Gossip traveled through her hometown back in Nigeria, carried by relatives who only heard the headlines, never the truth. Voices from thousands of miles away called her selfish, heartless, un-African. Some asked how she could destroy a man's destiny, as if destiny were a fragile ornament she had dropped accidentally. The narrative mutated into something monstrous. She was the villain, and Michael was the man whose dreams she crushed. They ignored the years she worked double shifts. They ignored the sacrifices. They ignored the betrayal. In gossip's courtroom, evidence never matters, only volume. Yet beneath the noise, another group emerged, quiet but solid. Older nurses she worked with slipped encouraging notes into her locker. A co-worker brought her lunch, saying she admired Sarah's courage. A divorced neighbor knocked softly one evening to tell her she'd done what many women were too afraid to do. These subtle gestures carried more weight than the loud criticism. They reminded her that strength often offends the insecure, that women who refuse to be used are always labeled difficult by those who benefit from their silence. Validation found her where she least expected it. Despite the support, the emotional toll pressed heavily on her chest. She found herself avoiding certain places, anticipating judgmental stares. Even grocery shopping felt like walking through a maze of imagined whispers. Community shame is a shadow. It grows longer with every step. But Sarah refused to shrink beneath it. Instead, she allowed the pressure to refine her clarity. Every accusation reminded her of why she acted. Every whisper strengthened her resolve. She understood now that reclaiming one's dignity often comes with attacks. The discomfort of becoming a different woman than people expected. One evening, as she sat on her porch listening to the distant hum of traffic, she felt a profound shift settle inside her. She realized the community hadn't chosen sides based on truth, only convenience. And that realization freed her. She no longer needed anyone's approval to validate her decision. She had heard the betrayal with her own ears. She had lived the exhaustion, felt the manipulation, carried the weight. Their opinions were echoes. Her experience was the flame. She inhaled deeply, exhaling the last fragments of doubt. She didn't destroy a man's dream. She protected her own future. The house felt different in the days that followed, not empty, but spacious, like it had finally exhaled after months of holding its breath. Sarah moved through each room slowly, noticing how silence no longer felt threatening. It felt earned. She opened the curtains wide, letting sunlight wash over the living room, warming spaces that once held cold shadows of doubt. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the need to brace herself before walking into her own home. The walls no longer echoed with deception. They echoed with possibility, and that quiet shift softened her pulse. Each morning, she brewed her coffee without rushing, letting the steam rise in soft spirals that matched the gentler rhythm of her thoughts. She sat by the window, wrapped in a throw blanket, feeling the stillness settle into her bones. The absence of Michael's footsteps or requests felt like liberation disguised as simplicity. She hadn't realized how much emotional labor she carried, anticipating his moods, managing his expectations, filling in the emotional gaps he left behind. Now, her energy returned to her like a healing tide, reminding her she didn't have to live on depletion to feel useful. Returning to work felt lighter too, as if a heavy curtain had lifted from her spirit. She walked through hospital hallways with a straighter spine, greeting patients with warmth unburdened by hidden grief. Co-workers noticed the difference, the clarity in her eyes, the quiet confidence in her movements. She no longer checked her phone obsessively during breaks. She no longer battled the fear of discovering another secret. Instead, she embraced the structure of her shifts, allowing routine to soothe her. Healing didn't come in dramatic waves. It came in small, steady breaths, each one reclaiming a piece of herself. At home, she began reorganizing her life, cleaning out drawers, donating clothes, rearranging furniture. Each action felt symbolic, like gently scraping away the residue of a life built on lies. She found old receipts from the immigration process and tucked them into a folder labeled Lessons, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for the woman she had become. She wasn't running from the past. She was using it to build a wiser future. Every object she discarded loosened another knot inside her chest, reminding her that peace often begins with making room for new beginnings. Nights brought the deepest clarity. She lit candles, played soft jazz, and allowed herself to enjoy the ritual of unwinding. No arguments. No tension. No pretending. She read books she had abandoned months ago, journals she had neglected while caring for someone who never cared back. In the quiet glow of her living room, she felt a profound truth settle in. She wasn't lonely. Loneliness had been what she felt beside Michael. What she felt now was solitude, gentle, empowering, grounding. It wrapped around her like a warm shawl, teaching her the difference between being alone and being at peace. Gradually, Sarah felt her reflection change. Not physically, emotionally. She saw strength where she once saw desperation. She saw discernment where she once saw naivety. She saw a woman who had walked through humiliation but refused to stay in it. Pain had softened her, but truth had sharpened her, giving her the balance she long needed. She began smiling more. Actual smiles, not the stretched ones she used while pretending everything was fine. Healing didn't erase the scars. It taught her how to wear them with dignity, as evidence of a chapter she survived without losing herself. One evening, she stepped onto her porch as the sun dipped behind the skyline, bathing the sky in gold and scarlet. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the past months release with her breath. She realized then that the most powerful choice she had ever made wasn't withdrawing the sponsorship, it was choosing herself. She had rewritten her story from victim to survivor, from stepping stone to boundary line. The peace she felt wasn't soft or fragile, it was fortified, earned through fire. She wasn't waiting for life to hurt her again. She was ready to live it on her own terms. The truth settled in Sarah's life the way morning light settles into a quiet room, slow but undeniable. She realized she hadn't just escaped betrayal, she had stepped out of a carefully designed trap. Every day that passed, she understood more clearly how deeply she had been misled, not because she was weak, but because she was hopeful. Hope, she learned, is a beautiful thing in the right hands and a dangerous thing in the wrong ones. She felt no shame in having loved. The shame belonged to the man who weaponized that love. Her healing became her declaration of worth. As she moved forward, she began recognizing the subtle ways life had been preparing her for this awakening. Her long shifts, her resilience, her independence, they had strengthened her long before Michael entered her world. He mistook her kindness for naivety, her generosity for gullibility. But those qualities weren't flaws. They were gifts he never deserved to receive. His betrayal didn't diminish them, it highlighted them. She realized that sometimes the universe allows masks to slip not to break us, but to redirect us. Betrayal had not ended her story. It had rerouted it toward a truer, wiser path. She reflected often on the moment she heard the word Maga, how it cracked open a truth she might have spent years ignoring. That single word had carried centuries of manipulation, exploitation, and deceit. It wasn't just an insult, it was a revelation. It revealed who he was, what he valued, and how he viewed the woman who had poured her soul and savings into his future. But it also revealed something far more powerful, her capacity to rise. She realized now that the most dangerous people are those who underestimate the strength of the hearts they try to use. With time, she stopped replaying the betrayal and began analyzing the lesson. She saw how easily love can blur the red of warning flags into soft pinks if you want the picture badly enough. She remembered the trusting version of herself and thanked that woman, not for being blind, but for being sincere. Sincerity isn't foolish, it's rare. But sincerity without boundaries becomes fuel for opportunists. Sarah learned that love must be measured, not by how much you give, but by whether the person beside you can hold what you give without breaking it. That truth reshaped her future. There were days when anger nudged at her, whispering about revenge or bitterness. But she found no comfort in those whispers. The justice she had already set in motion carried its own weight, its own precision. She didn't need to prove anything to Michael or to the community that misunderstood her. Life had already aligned the consequences he earned. And as for her, she no longer feared being alone or starting over. Betrayal had introduced her to a version of herself that was sharper, stronger, and more self-aware than she had ever imagined possible. Sometimes she thought about the metaphor people used for women like her, ladders. Ladders that men climb to reach higher ground, abandoning them once they've ascended. Sarah understood now that the danger wasn't in being a ladder, it was in staying one. She had allowed her heart to be leaned upon by a man who intended to move on the moment he reached his destination. But ladders, too, can burn. And when they burn, they force those who climb them to face the fall they thought they'd avoided. She didn't watch his fall with joy, but with closure. On a quiet Sunday evening, she sat on her porch and let the last traces of her past drift away like smoke. She understood the moral now. The one life had carved into her spirit. Love freely, but guard your heart. Give generously, but not blindly. And when someone mistakes your kindness for weakness, transform that kindness into a boundary they cannot cross again. Her story wasn't about revenge. It was